The Jowett Javelin, all the threads in a Javelin are BSF mainly, and a wee bit of Whitworth, but mainly BSF, as most British cars were. So you need the correct tools before you do anything on your Javelin. Luckily, Whitworth spanners are still available, and they have the same size spanners as BSF. They are marked differently. For instance, a 516 BSF spanner that will tighten a 516 bolt. The same thing in Whitworth is a quarter Whitworth. Don't ask me why, but it is. So if you haven't got any Whitworth or BSF spanners, the best place is probably Spot Meets or online. You can still get them new. Not so easy in New Zealand, but there are places online you can get them. So and open end ring spanners are good, and a socket set is pretty necessary too. So once you've got that, you can do almost anything. Now, of course, before you drain the oil, to change the oil, you need to have a new pack of oil. Now, this is a bit of a curly one because there's a lot of thought about which, why, and how, but originally the Javelin was recommended to have 30 grade oil in the summer and 40 grade in the summer and 30 in the winter. Well, these days, of course, it's all multi-grade. So what we need is anything that's 20W50. That suits the Javelin nicely. So it can be Caltex, Javelin, Mobil oil, Castrol. The thing to remember, of course, that the capacity of the Javelin engine is 9 pints, which is 5.1 litres. So if you buy the usual pack at the warehouse or garage or whatever, they're 4 litres, not quite enough. So you'd have to get 2. The other way out of it, of course, and is a good oil, is Penrite Classic Light. That's 20W 50 or even 60 actually, but that's fine, and that gives you 5 litres, so it's enough to do the job. So it's your choice. Look for zinc content in the oil, because the zinc is kind of on the cam gear of a Javelin. So that's a bit of, if you can find oil that mentions it's got a certain percentage of zinc, that would be the one to use. Not really necessary. Waste of money, really. It won't help the cause. The usual 2050, 2060 is more than sufficient, and it's cheaper. Now, you will need to get your correct filter, and you need to know which filter to buy. So we'll start with the early Javelin first. That has a Vokes filter. It's quite a long canister, and it was green originally, but of course over time they can be painted, but it's quite a long filter, and that needs the Vokes type filter. And of course these filters are available from Jowett parts. So that's the early filter if you've got the early one, and remember the canister is green and it's quite long. It nearly touches the fan stays at the back of the motor. If it's the later one, it's Tecalomite, and they were bronze, and they're bronze originally, and they had this little Tecalomite sticker on it. Well, not a sticker, but it's a little plate. So, and that's much shorter than the early one. So I'll put that down, and here is the filter, shorter than the other one, you can see. So once you decide which one you've got, you order the correct filter from Jowett Parts, and then you're away. First job, of course, before you drain the sump is to drain the oil filter. The oil filter, as you know, sits on top of the engine, and the engine is bolted in the chassis with a 15-degree tilt back from horizontal. That means that when you undo the drain bung, which I'll explain to you in a minute, you really want to lift the back of the car with a jack under the diff so that the motor then tilts the other way, and it'll drain out the front of the filter housing and make less mess. As well as the filter and the oil packs, it's always a good idea to have a roll of paper towels because it can be messy. Okay, we'll look at the first model filter housing, and I'll explain where the drain screw is. Now, that's the early housing that your canister goes on. Now, you're looking at the back of the filter, and the actual screw, the drain screw, is that one there. And it's on the driver's side as you're leaning over the car, the driver's side, and you need your 1/4 width spanner or your 5/16 BSF spanner to undo that nut. Bring it back about 1/2 inch, and that'll expose a hole, and the oil from the canister will now, especially if you've got the back end of the car raised up, will drain back into the sump. Of course, it's preferred to have the engine warm before you drain the oil, and everything runs so much easier. So that's what you do on the early model, which is PA to PB, and the later ones PC to PE. We'll just change the other housing now. Now, here's the later housing. Quite different, but I'll turn it round so we can see where this drain plug is. And it's to this side here. Whoops, there. That's the one you've got to undo. It's not quite as accessible. You can't get a socket on it. So you've got to have an open end spanner, and again, wind it back 1/2 inch, which will expose the hole. And that'll drain back in the sump too. This particular housing has a bypass pipe from there to there, and that gets a bit in the way too. And I would suggest when the oil is drained to undo that drain bung completely and put a hacksaw slot in it for a screwdriver. Makes it an awful lot easier. Okay, now we can drain the oil in the actual sump. Undo the sump bung, but leave the car jacked up under the diff, because the bung is towards the front of the sump, so that helps drain. And if you can, which would help, you can put a jack under the chassis on the driver's side and just lift that a wee bit, which will tilt the car towards the passenger side, so any oil will run out the bung even better. Make sure you really drain the sump. Sometimes, if you can spare the time, just leave it overnight, but otherwise 1/2 an hour or so, and you can be fitting the filter while the sump's draining. So yeah, it's a matter of choice as to which way, as to what you want to do. Sometimes you might want to jack up the car at the back and leave the filters drain overnight. The longer you leave it, the less oil you've got about when you actually do it. So it's just a matter of choice. Now, when you are happy that it's draining away and you've left a bit of time for it to actually drain away, the next job is to remove the filter canister, and you do this by undoing the bolt at the end of either filter canister, either model, same principle. Because you've got to withdraw the canister with the filter inside, if you could just pull it back and tilt it up and get it clear of the motor, it would be good. But you can't do that unless you undo one fan stay, say the passenger's fan stay. Then you can remove the filter from the housing, and with the fan stay out of the way, you can come back and then tilt it up to keep as much of the last bit of dregs of oil in the canister rather than going all over the top of the engine. This is where the paper towels come in. You can lay them under the filter before you undo it, just in case you've still got a few drips to catch. So having done that, your next job now is to remove the old filter seal. And on the early model, that's easy because it's a flat seal like that, as opposed to the later one, which is a little wee thin one. Don't know if you can see the difference, but the early one comes out easy. You just put a wee pricker in it, like a little scribe or something, pop it out, pop the new one in, which will come with the filter. And the later model is a little more difficult because it sits right inside the housing with the casting either side of it. So you've only got to get a thin pricker to pull it out, but make sure you have got it out. Sometimes it looks as though you've got it out and it's not. So do make sure you got it out before you put the new one in. And then, of course, you can wash out the canister and pop the new filter in, and with a new seal you can bolt the canister back to the housing fairly firm. The later, just if we look at this, the later filter canister has there has a square seal, which normally doesn't need to be replaced, but it must have a square seal in there. When I say square, it's round, of course, but it's a square section, and the washer of the bolt just compresses that slightly and makes an all tight join. So make sure that bolt's pretty tight, and then you can put your fan stay back on, and don't forget to tighten the oil drain screw. Do that nice and firm too, without stripping threads, of course. The fibre washer should be okay to retighten, but if you're worried, unscrew the screw right out and pop a new fibre washer under there, tighten it up again, and the same with the later model one. And then you're ready to put oil in the sump, but don't forget, of course, to replace the sump bung. Wipe the threads, wipe the flange, check the fibre seal, and tighten the sump bung nice and firm. Okay, with the sump bung nice and tight, you can now carefully pour the oil into the oil filler on the front of the motor. Depending on what pack you've got, if it's a 4 litre, you can bung the whole 4 litres in before you need to check. But if it's the 5 litre, just see how you go, because the level is only correct once the motor's been running and it's filled up the canister with oil. So you can bring it up to the level on the dipstick, and then start the motor. Watch for the oil pressure to come up on the gauge, or the light goes out if it's just a standard model. come round to the engine and make sure you haven't got any leaks around the filter bolt or the filter seal. And when you're happy, shut the motor off, let it stand for a bit, and then check with the dipstick and top up as necessary. Yes, well, once you've checked the oil level after the canister's filled, and you've checked for leaks and everything's good, and you've got the correct amount of oil in the sump, take it for a run around the several blocks and come back and have another look underneath and under the bonnet, just to make sure that everything's right, and then you can have a good night's sleep. Of course, we haven't discussed the period between changes. Now, this will vary a lot, but even if the car is not used, it still pays to change the oil once a year. The old story was 5,000 miles, change the oil, 10,000 miles perhaps, but we wouldn't do that sort of miles in a year probably. So, but a yearly change is always good because oil does deteriorate over time, even though it's not being run. So just keep that in mind, and note in your little logbook or the sticker that you'll stick on the door pillar perhaps of when you change it and the mileage, and just keep an eye on when it should be done again. And that more or less completes the this job that you can do yourself and get some satisfaction from.